Four girls vanished on a train journey in 1987. What FBI found 25 years later shocked the country. In the summer of 1987, four close friends, Emily, Sarah, Jessica, and Linda, boarded a late-night train from Chicago to St. Louis. They were full of laughter, excitement, and dreams of the future, carrying journals, cassette players, and snacks for their trip. Witnesses recalled their voices echoing through the train corridors, the four inseparable girls enjoying one of their last adventures before college. But by the next morning, when the train reached its final stop, the girls were gone. Their seats were empty, their bags abandoned, and the conductor swore he had last seen them near the dining car around midnight. Police searched every inch of the train, every station along the route, and the nearby tracks, but there was no sign of the four girls. Their families were shattered, and the case soon became one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in U.S. history. Years passed, with theories ranging from abduction to runaway attempts. But in 2012, exactly 25 years later, construction workers stumbled upon a hidden storage compartment inside an abandoned train maintenance yard in Illinois. Inside were personal items that had once belonged to the girls. A cassette tape with their voices recorded, half-burned diaries, and even clothing fragments carefully folded inside a rusty trunk. The FBI reopened the case, uncovering chilling evidence that the train's maintenance crew in 1987 had links to an underground criminal network. The shocking discovery suggested the girls may have been lured off the train during a stop and held captive. Even more disturbing, coded notes found in the trunk hinted that others might have been involved in silencing them. Though the full truth has never been revealed, the 2012 discovery reignited national attention. For the families, it was both a cruel reminder of their loss and a faint glimmer of hope that one day justice would finally arrive. The mystery of the four vanished girls remains one of America's darkest train travel legends, where laughter on board turned into silence that still haunts the country. The beginning of the journey, 1987. It was the summer of 1987, a year when America was alive with the sounds of cassette tapes, payphones on every corner, and the promise of new beginnings for young dreamers. Among those dreamers were four inseparable girls: Emily, Sarah, Jessica, and Linda. They had grown up together in the same neighborhood, sharing childhood secrets, heartbreaks, and laughter that echoed through the streets of their small Midwestern town. For them, life was just beginning to unfold, and a train journey to St. Louis seemed like the perfect adventure before stepping into adulthood. The train station that night was alive with the hum of voices, footsteps, and the metallic groan of engines preparing to move. The girls carried small suitcases and wore the kind of carefree smiles that only teenagers on the brink of freedom could wear. Emily clutched her journal, a leather-bound book filled with dreams she wanted to one day turn into stories. Sarah had her Walkman in hand, headphones around her neck, and a cassette of her favorite band ready for the journey. Jessica carried snacks she insisted would keep them all awake, while Linda had a camera hanging from her neck, determined to capture every memory. They weren't just four girls on a train. They were four souls bound by a promise that nothing would ever come between them. The way they laughed and teased one another made even the conductor pause to smile. Fellow passengers recalled later how the girls' laughter echoed down the narrow corridors, how their voices rose above the steady clatter of the train wheels, how alive they seemed in that moment. None could imagine that this would be the last time those voices would ever be heard together. As the train pulled out of the station, the night sky stretched endlessly above, stars hidden by rolling clouds. The rhythmic sound of the wheels striking the tracks became the background music of their journey. Emily wrote in her journal, documenting every small detail. Sarah leaned back, lost in the beats of her favorite song. Jessica, restless and talkative, suggested exploring the dining car. Linda snapped photos of them laughing, capturing moments that would later become eerie relics of night that turned into a nightmare. Passengers seated nearby noticed their energy and the way they seemed untouched by the weight of the world. They were full of life, one elderly traveler later recalled. It was like watching the sun in human form. But as bright as their presence was, shadows lingered in the dimly lit corners of the train. The dining car was sparsely lit, and certain compartments felt oddly isolated, creating an atmosphere both exciting and unsettling. The train moved deeper into the night, and the girls began to roam from car to car. They joked about how the train felt like a maze, with endless doors and narrow passages leading into unknown spaces. At times, the silence of the night wrapped around them so tightly that the sound of the train itself felt like the only thing alive. Yet for the four friends, this sense of mystery only added to the thrill of the journey. They stopped by the windows, watching the blur of fields and forests fly past. Occasionally, the lights of a distant farmhouse flickered, reminding them that life continued outside while they were wrapped in the moving steel cocoon of the train. Linda snapped more photographs, unaware that these might be the last pictures anyone would ever see of them alive. Each flash of the camera illuminated not just their smiles, but also the emptiness of the surrounding cars. Around midnight, the dining car became their gathering place. They sat in a booth, whispering plans for the future, making promises to visit each other no matter where life took them after college. The cook recalled later that they ordered nothing but coffee and hot chocolate, as though they wanted to stretch the night endlessly. Their voices rose in bursts of laughter, then fell into whispers no one could fully hear. To the staff, they were just another group of girls having fun. To history, they were moments away from vanishing. Other passengers, drifting into sleep, remembered faintly seeing them pass through the corridors, always together, always inseparable. Some even noted that the girls seemed curious, peering into compartments, as if drawn to the mystery of the train itself. What they didn't know was that their every step was carrying them closer to an unspeakable fate. And so, as the train rattled on through the night, four best friends sat side by side, laughing, planning, and capturing memories, believing that tomorrow held nothing but promise. The last photographs, the last journal entries, the last cassette recording of their laughter, all of it remained inside that moving train, pieces of a puzzle that would haunt investigators and families for decades. What began as an innocent journey was about to be written into one of the darkest mysteries in American history, the mysterious disappearance. By dawn, the train slowed as it approached its final destination. Passengers stirred awake, gathering their belongings, stretching their stiff limbs, and preparing to disembark. Yet, in the compartment where the four girls had sat only hours earlier, there was an unnatural emptiness. Their seats were vacant, their conversations had ceased, and only silence remained where laughter once filled the air. Their bags were still neatly placed in the overhead racks, untouched. Emily's journal lay half open on her seat, the ink of her last written words not yet dry. Sarah's cassette player was tucked inside her bag. The tape paused in the middle of a song. Jessica's snack wrappers were scattered across the table, and Linda's camera, still warm from use, hung carelessly on the seat. Everything screamed presence, but the girls themselves were gone. At first, the conductor assumed they were still wandering through the train, perhaps lost in conversation or exploring the cars further back. He checked the dining area, then the lounge, then the sleeper compartments. No one had seen them since shortly after midnight. The staff brushed it off as a simple delay, perhaps thinking the girls had dozed off in some quiet corner. But as passengers began filing off the train, the unease grew. Parents pulled their children close, and curious eyes glanced at the four abandoned seats. The conductor, now alarmed, ordered a thorough search of the entire train. Every compartment was inspected, every restroom unlocked, every darkened corner checked. The result was chilling. There was no trace of the girls anywhere. Authorities were contacted immediately, and the station swarmed with police officers. The platform became a scene of hushed voices, nervous glances, and growing dread. Dogs were brought in to track their scent, but the trail stopped abruptly at the edge of the dining car. It was as if the four girls had dissolved into the night, leaving behind only fragments of their existence. Witness statements only deepened the mystery. Some passengers remembered seeing them laughing in the dining car. Others swore they passed the girls in the corridor not long before midnight. But the timelines didn't align, and no one could provide a clear account of their last known moment together. The confusion painted a picture more like folklore than fact, a story without an ending. Even stranger was the fact that no one reported hearing screams, cries, or any sign of distress. The disappearance was silent, almost surgical in its execution. How could 4 young women vanish from a moving train without a single witness? The question echoed through the station, unsettling both the investigators and the public as rumors began to swirl. Detectives searched the tracks along the route, fearing the worst, that the girls had fallen or been pushed off the train. Yet mile after mile, there was no evidence, no clothing, no blood, no bodies. It was as though the night itself had swallowed them whole. The lack of physical evidence turned the investigation into a dark labyrinth with no exits. For the families waiting at the destination, the news struck like a knife. Mothers and fathers stood frozen on the platform, their eyes darting across the sea of passengers, searching desperately for a glimpse of their daughters. Instead, they were met only with police officers carrying notebooks, asking questions, and shaking their heads with grave expressions. By the end of that day, the 4 girls were officially declared missing. The train that was meant to carry them toward their future had instead become the stage for their disappearance. What began as a joyful adventure now transformed into one of the most baffling mysteries in American history. 4 seats left behind, for lives unaccounted for, and a silence that grew heavier with every unanswered question the first investigation. The disappearance of the 4 girls immediately escalated into a full-scale investigation. The moment the train was cleared of passengers, officers cordoned it off with yellow tape, transforming it into a rolling crime scene. Detectives walked through each compartment with flashlights, searching every shadow for clues. The hum of reporters' voices outside the station blended with the metallic creaks of the train, creating an atmosphere thick with dread and unanswered questions. The investigators began with the girls' belongings. Emily's journal was collected carefully, page by page examined for any cryptic notes or references to secret plans. Her last entry spoke only of excitement for the trip ahead, ending abruptly mid-sentence. Sarah's cassette player was rewound and played, revealing nothing more than static after a faint recording of laughter. Linda's camera was developed, producing images of smiling faces and empty train corridors, ordinary snapshots that suddenly felt eerie, like fragments of a timeline cut short. Detectives questioned the crew members relentlessly. The conductor swore he last saw the girls near the dining car around midnight. The cook claimed they lingered at a booth, sipping hot chocolate, before wandering off together. A porter remembered seeing them laughing in the hallway, heading toward the back compartments. Yet none of the staff could recall what happened after that moment. 4 distinct testimonies that ended in silence, like a story with the last page missing. Passenger statements added to the confusion. Some remembered glimpses of the girls passing through. Others admitted they were asleep and noticed nothing unusual. One woman insisted she saw the group near the restroom doors, whispering among themselves, but her account conflicted with the timeline provided by others. Every testimony seemed to contradict the next, creating a fog of uncertainty that left investigators grasping at shadows. Authorities turned their focus outward, scanning the train stops during the night. They checked each station where the train had briefly halted, interviewing workers, janitors, and anyone who might have noticed 4 young women stepping off. Not a single witness recalled seeing them leave. Ticket counters, waiting rooms, and platforms were all scrutinized, but the trail remained cold. Search teams were dispatched along the tracks, combing the dark woods and open fields that bordered the train's route. Volunteers, dogs, and mounted patrols joined in, but the vast landscape yielded nothing. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, no sign that anyone had ever stepped off the train at all. It was as though the steel carriages had swallowed the girls, keeping its secret hidden deep within. The FBI was eventually called in, their presence signaling just how serious the case had become. Agents carried specialized equipment, dusting compartments for fingerprints, checking for hidden compartments, and even examining the undercarriage of the train. But again, nothing tied to the girl's disappearance was discovered. The investigation was rapidly becoming one of the most perplexing cases the Bureau had ever encountered. Families of the missing girls gathered at the station as the hours stretched into days. Mothers sobbed quietly as officers returned their daughters' untouched bags. Fathers demanded answers, pressing detectives for progress that wasn't there. The sight of their belongings, diaries, clothes, small souvenirs, was haunting. It was evidence that they had been there, and yet it offered no explanation as to where they had gone. Rumors began circulating in the press. Some speculated that the girls had run away, orchestrating their own disappearance. Others whispered about kidnappings, stalkers, or sinister figures who might have boarded the train unnoticed. The public grew restless, and newspapers plastered the girls' smiling faces across front pages nationwide. What had started as a mystery was quickly becoming a national obsession. Despite the tireless search, the investigation hit a wall. There were no witnesses who could confirm the girls' final moments. No physical evidence that explained their vanishing, and no suspects to interrogate. Every lead crumbled into nothing, leaving investigators staring into the void of uncertainty. The first investigation ended with more questions than answers, and an ominous truth began to settle in. The night the girls vanished had erased them as cleanly as if they had never existed at all. The family's despair. The news of the disappearance hit the families like a storm without warning. One moment, they were expecting to embrace their daughters as the train rolled into the station, and the next they were told they were gone, vanished without explanation. For the parents, it was not just shock, it was a shattering of reality. Their children had stepped onto a train full of life, and now the authorities could only hand them suitcases, journals, and photographs, as though those objects were meant to replace the girls themselves. Emily's mother clutched her daughter's journal like it was a lifeline, running her fingers over the unfinished words as though touching the page could somehow lead her back. Sarah's father played the cassette from her Walkman again and again, listening to the faint laughter that lingered before the tape turned into static. Linda's parents developed her final roll of film, staring at the smiling faces in photographs that suddenly looked ghostly. Jessica's mother kept her daughter's half-empty bag of candy, refusing to throw it away, as if even the smallest thing she touched carried a piece of her presence. The families camped outside police stations, demanding updates that rarely came. Investigators repeated the same lines. No evidence, no witnesses, no progress. Every day was another wound. The parents' desperation grew so intense that they began searching themselves, walking along train tracks with flashlights, combing through woods at night, calling their daughters' names into the emptiness. Each unanswered echo only deepened the pain. At home, their rooms became shrines. Emily's bed was left unmade, her diary placed neatly on the nightstand. Sarah's posters still lined the walls of her room, her headphones resting silently on the pillow. Linda's photographs remained pinned above her desk, smiling faces frozen in time. Jessica's sneakers stayed by the door, as if she might walk in at any moment to put them on. The families couldn't bring themselves to change a thing, afraid that altering the smallest detail meant giving up hope. The media swarmed the families, cameras capturing every tearful plea and every trembling word. Mothers appeared on television begging whoever had taken their daughters to return them alive. Fathers stood stiffly beside them, their eyes red but their voices firm, demanding justice. Each interview spread their pain to the nation, turning the story into a haunting saga that no one could ignore. As days turned into weeks, the families clung to hope in different ways. Some visited churches daily, lighting candles for their daughter's safe return. Others carried the girls' photographs everywhere, handing out flyers at bus stations, gas stations, and diners along the train route. Some even turned to psychics and private investigators, desperate for any clue, any whisper of where their children might be. But hope often collided with despair. Every time the phone rang, hearts leapt, only to crash when it was not news of the girls. Each knock on the door brought both fear and expectation, but more often it was just neighbors bringing food, unable to offer answers. The weight of not knowing became unbearable, stretching every second into an eternity. The strain fractured relationships. Some parents blamed the railway company for negligence, while others turned their grief inward, wondering if they had somehow failed their daughters. Friends of the missing girls withdrew into silence, unable to face the empty desks at school or the unanswered phone calls. The entire community seemed to move under a cloud, where laughter was replaced by whispers and every shadow carried the weight of loss. Nights were the hardest. Mothers often admitted later that they would wake up to the sound of footsteps they imagined were their daughters returning home. Fathers would sit by the window, staring into the street, as if expecting headlights to bring the girls back at last. But the hours always passed in silence, the clock ticking relentlessly while the questions remained unanswered. For the families, life became a cruel balance between hope and despair. They couldn't bury their daughters because there were no bodies. They couldn't celebrate their return because there was no proof they were alive. Instead, they lived in a suspended state of grief, caught between believing in miracles and fearing the worst. Every sunrise was a reminder. The girls had not come home, and the nightmare was far from over. The theories that spread. As weeks turned into months with no answers, the void left by the investigation was quickly filled by speculation. People could not comprehend how four healthy, lively girls could simply vanish from a moving train without leaving a single trace. In the absence of facts, theories began to multiply like wildfire. Each whispered explanation carried its own weight, some rooted in logic, others born from fear, and many laced with chilling imagination. One of the earliest theories suggested that the girls had run away. Investigators briefly entertained the idea. After all, they were young, and many teenagers dreamed of escaping small-town life for something bigger. But the evidence didn't fit. Their bags, money, and identification were all left behind. Their diaries spoke of school, family, and bright futures, not secret plans to disappear. Still, the runaway theory persisted in certain circles, leaving some to believe the girls had orchestrated their own vanishing act. A darker theory emerged soon after: abduction. Many began to suspect that someone on the train had lured or forced the girls away. Passengers remembered seeing men loitering near the dining car, strangers who seemed out of place. Whispers spread of organized groups preying on travelers, pulling them into hidden spaces before slipping them off at night stops. The idea terrified families who had always considered trains safe, turning every stranger on board into a potential suspect. There were also rumors of a secret compartment. Some claimed the girls may have stumbled upon something they were not meant to see, an illegal operation hidden within the train itself. Perhaps they were silenced before they could speak. Maintenance workers, baggage cars, and even the dining storage areas became the focus of suspicion. The thought that the very train meant to carry them to safety might have become their prison was enough to haunt anyone who had ever traveled by rail. Then came the whispers of a more chilling possibility, that the girls had been targeted long before they boarded. Neighbors recalled men in cars parked near their homes in the weeks leading up to the trip. Others said they noticed unfamiliar faces around the station that night. The theory suggested careful planning, that someone had studied the girls' routine, their journey, and waited for the perfect opportunity to strike. It was a thought that made parents across the country shudder, that predators could be watching their children unnoticed. Some turned to supernatural explanations. In small towns, old legends resurfaced, stories of vanishing passengers that had circulated for decades, tales of restless spirits haunting the railroads, of places where travelers disappeared into thin air. While authorities dismissed these accounts as folklore, such theories spread in hushed tones, fueled by fear and the chilling absence of any physical evidence. To some, it was easier to believe in ghosts than to accept that human hands had orchestrated something so sinister. The media played its part in fanning the flames. Newspapers published headlines that leaned into sensationalism, Girls Step into Thin Air, Train of Shadows, and The Vanishing Quartet. Television programs speculated endlessly, inviting so-called experts to dissect every angle. Theories of runaway teens, hidden cults, and shadowy organizations dominated broadcasts. Each story only deepened the mystery, turning the case into a national obsession. Conspiracy theories began to spiral. Some insisted the authorities knew more than they admitted. Why, people asked, had the FBI been called in so quickly? Why did investigators seem reluctant to share details? The secrecy fueled suspicions of cover-ups. Rumors that the girls had uncovered something illegal or dangerous on the train, and that powerful figures had ensured their silence. Though unproven, the whispers refused to die down. Theories also divided the community. Some neighbors whispered that the girls had staged it all, craving attention or chasing freedom. Others grew defensive, insisting the girls were victims of something larger and far more sinister. These disagreements created tension at vigils, town meetings, and even within the families themselves. Theories became not just explanations but battlegrounds of belief, shaping the way people remembered the missing. Through it all, the most unsettling truth was this. Every theory seemed possible, yet none could be proven. Runaway, abduction, conspiracy, or something otherworldly. The lines between fact and speculation blurred more with each passing day. And as the theories multiplied, they only added layers of confusion to a mystery already too dark to bear. The long silence, 25 years. As the years slipped by, the case of the 4 vanished girls grew colder with every passing season. What began as breaking news plastered across every newspaper eventually faded to a small column, then to nothing at all. The train continued its routes. Passengers came and went, and the world moved forward. But for the families, time stood still. The bedrooms of the missing girls became frozen relics of 1987. Posters of pop bands still clung to the walls. Cassette tapes gathered dust, and diaries remained unfinished on nightstands. Parents tiptoed through these rooms as though entering sacred ground, afraid that cleaning or changing them would erase the last traces of their daughters. The silence of those spaces was louder than any scream. Every anniversary of the disappearance reopened wounds. Vigils were held at the train station, candles flickering in the night as neighbors whispered prayers. Each year, fewer people attended, but the families remained, standing faithfully under the station lights with photographs clutched to their chests. Hope dimmed, but never fully died, even as decades slipped away. The investigation files grew thicker, filled with false leads, dead ends, and fading notes written by detectives who had long since retired. New investigators occasionally took up the case, flipping through yellowing pages with fresh determination, only to find themselves trapped in the same endless cycle of questions with no answers. The mystery became a weight too heavy to carry, and slowly it was set aside. The silence was cruelest for the families. Parents grew older, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing, but their questions never softened. Some passed away never knowing the truth, their last words filled with pleas for answers. Siblings grew up in the shadow of the missing, forever compared to sisters who had vanished, forever haunted by the absence at every holiday table. Society, too, changed around the case. Technology advanced, DNA analysis became more sophisticated, and databases grew more powerful. Yet despite these tools, nothing emerged. It was as if the case existed outside of time, impervious to progress, mocking every advancement with its stubborn silence. The mystery clung to the past, refusing to move into the present. Rumors never fully disappeared. In bars, at gas stations, and on late-night radio shows, callers revived old theories, abduction conspiracies, hidden compartments. Urban legends spun out of the case, turning the story into a ghost tale parents told their children about trains where people vanished into thin air. The girls' faces, once real and vibrant, became symbols of mystery, their humanity fading into folklore. For the FBI, The case remained a cold file in a locked cabinet. Agents occasionally glanced at it, aware of its notoriety, but powerless to change it. Some admitted privately that the case haunted them, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. For people don't simply vanish from a moving train, and yet they had. The absence of evidence was a wound that refused to heal. The families clung to tiny fragments of hope. A phone call from an unknown number, a letter with no return address, a vague sighting reported in another state. All were investigated, all led nowhere. Still, each spark of possibility kept them going, even when disappointment followed close behind. Hope was the only weapon they had against despair, and they wielded it relentlessly. And so, for 25 long years, the story of the 4 vanished girls lingered in silence. The world aged, the towns changed, and memories grew faint, but the mystery remained untouched. Like an unfinished sentence, it hovered over everyone who remembered, demanding an ending that never came. Until the year 2012, when a shocking discovery shattered the silence and dragged the past back into the light. The shocking 2012 discovery. It was an ordinary spring morning in 2012 when construction crews were sent to clear an abandoned train maintenance yard in Illinois. The yard had been shut down for decades, a place of rusted carriages, broken tracks, and silence heavy with history. Workers moved through the decayed site with little thought, tearing down old walls and pulling apart forgotten compartments, until one of them stumbled upon something that stopped the work cold. Behind a rusted steel panel, hidden in what looked like a storage space long sealed shut, lay a compartment no one knew existed. The air inside was stale, suffocating, as if it had not been disturbed in years. The workers at first thought they had discovered old tools or discarded equipment, but as the dim light fell across the objects inside, they realized this was no ordinary storage room. What they found would reignite a case the world had almost forgotten. Inside the compartment was a trunk, battered and corroded, its hinges squealing as it was forced open. Within it were items far too personal to be forgotten relics. There was a folded sweater, faded but unmistakably from the 1980s. A leather-bound journal, its pages warped from time, lay carefully placed on top. And next to it, shockingly intact, was a cassette tape labeled with one of the girls' names. Emily. The discovery sent immediate shockwaves. Local police were called, followed quickly by the FBI, who wasted no time securing the entire site. What had begun as a simple demolition had suddenly turned into the reopening of a national mystery. Cameras flashed as investigators carried the trunk out under heavy guard, treating it like the key to a vault of secrets sealed for a quarter of a century. Forensic teams moved quickly, cataloging each item. The journal contained entries up until the very week of the disappearance, her last words describing the excitement of the trip. The cassette, when played, carried the girls' voices, faint but audible. They laughed, sang along to songs, and spoke of their dreams for the future. The sound was chilling. It was proof of life, captured in a moment before everything went wrong. There were also clothing fragments, folded neatly, as though someone had taken the time to preserve them. Half-burned diaries belonging to another girl were found, their words scorched at the edges, as if someone had tried to destroy them, but stopped midway. Even more disturbing were notes written in a strange code, symbols and numbers that experts later said resembled criminal markings often used by underground networks. The discovery raised terrifying questions. Why had these items been hidden so carefully? Who had sealed them inside a forgotten compartment of train yard? And most of all, what did it mean for the fate of the 4 girls? Investigators were stunned not just by what they found, but by the deliberate way it seemed to have been hidden, almost as though someone wanted the evidence preserved but concealed from the world. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Families of the missing girls were called in, their grief reignited after years of silence. Mothers wept at the sight of their daughters' belongings, touching sweaters and photographs that had been locked away for 25 years. Fathers stood silently, rage and sorrow etched deep into their faces. For them, the past had come rushing back, sharper and more painful than ever. The nation, too, was stunned. Television broadcasts replayed the tape of the girls' voices again and again, letting viewers hear the laughter of 4 young women who had vanished into mystery. Newspapers dubbed it the ghost compartment and the trunk of secrets. The case that had once slipped into obscurity was now at the center of every conversation, every headline, every whisper. But the most chilling part of the discovery was this. The items gave answers, but also raised new mysteries. If the girls' belongings were here, were the girls themselves? Who placed these items in that hidden compartment? And why had they waited 25 years for someone to find them? The trunk had opened the door to the past, but behind it lay questions darker and more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The FBI's reopened case. The moment the trunk of belongings was confirmed to be linked to the missing girls, the FBI wasted no time. A case long buried in dust was ripped open again, this time with modern tools and relentless urgency. Boxes of old files were pulled from storage, faded photographs were re-examined, and a new generation of agents, many of whom had only heard the story as children, were assigned to unravel the mystery that had haunted the country for decades. The trunk itself became the centerpiece of the investigation. Every item was cataloged, sealed, and examined under microscopes. Fibers from the clothing were tested for DNA, chemical analysis was performed on the burned pages, and the cassette tape was studied for fingerprints. What was once just a collection of abandoned objects was now treated as sacred evidence, possibly the only bridge between the vanished girls and the truth. One chilling discovery came from the coded notes. Linguists and cryptographers worked around the clock to decipher the strange symbols. Patterns began to emerge, numbers that aligned with train routes, letters that seemed to reference specific stops along the line, and symbols that investigators later connected to known criminal networks operating in the Midwest during the late 1980s. The possibility that the girls had stumbled into something far larger than themselves suddenly became very real. The FBI also turned its attention back to the train's original staff. Men who had long since retired were tracked down and questioned again. Some were cooperative, but others seemed nervous, their stories inconsistent even after all these years. Rumors resurfaced about certain crew members suspected of ties to smuggling operations, raising the terrifying thought that the train itself had been more than just transportation. It had been a hunting ground. Forensic teams also examined the hidden compartment where the trunk had been found. Dust patterns and structural were suggested it had been sealed deliberately, not abandoned by accident. Tool marks on the steel indicated someone had welded it shut in the late 1980s, right around the time of the disappearance. Whoever placed the items there had wanted them hidden, but not destroyed, as though they were leaving behind a message for someone to find decades later. Agents pored over passenger lists from the original journey, re-interviewing those who were still alive. Many had grown old, their memories faded, but certain details returned. Men loitering in corridors, a sense of unease in the dining car, a conductor who seemed strangely evasive. Small fragments of memory, once dismissed, now gained new weight in light of the evidence found. The FBI also reached out to international agencies. Criminal networks of the 1980s often crossed borders, and there was speculation that the girls' disappearance could have been linked to trafficking operations spanning multiple states and even countries. Files once considered irrelevant were reopened, connecting the vanished girls to other unsolved cases of missing women along the same railway lines. As the investigation expanded, so did the pressure. Families of the missing girls, now gray-haired and weary, sat across from agents once again, demanding answers that had eluded them for half their lives. Each press conference brought both hope and agony. The nation watched as FBI officials carefully chose their words, revealing only fragments of information, as though the truth was too heavy to release all at once. The case room became a map of obsession. Photographs of the girls, images of the trunk, coded notes, train schedules, and sketches of the hidden compartment cover the walls. Red strings connected timelines, suspects, and theories. Agents worked late into the night, haunted by the same question that had echoed for 25 years. What really happened on that train? And yet, with every answer came more uncertainty. The FBI had evidence, leads, and new suspects, but no bodies, no definitive proof of the girl's fate. The deeper they dug, the darker the possibilities became. What they had reopened was not just a case. It was a labyrinth of secrets that stretched far beyond a single night in 1987, and its shadows were only beginning to reveal themselves, the chilling clues. As the FBI dug deeper into the reopened case, the most disturbing development was the emergence of new clues hidden within the old evidence. The girl's belongings, once thought to be little more than relics of a tragic past, began to reveal secrets piece by piece. For investigators, it was like the girls were reaching out from beyond time, leaving behind breadcrumbs for someone to follow. The cassette tape, once considered just a light-hearted recording, revealed more than laughter upon closer listening. Forensic audio specialists enhanced the background noises, isolating faint sounds behind the girls' voices. What they uncovered chilled agents to the bone, the sound of heavy footsteps. Pacing in the corridor, the metallic click of a latch locking, and, fainter still, the muffled voice of a man telling someone to stay quiet. Equally unsettling was the discovery inside the leather-bound journal. Hidden between the lines of cheerful entries about train snacks and sightseeing plans were words written so faintly they had almost disappeared. Using ultraviolet light, investigators found phrases scribbled in the margins. Someone is watching us. Don't go alone. And most haunting of all, if something happens, find us. The handwriting matched one of the missing girls. The coded notes became darker with each breakthrough. What looked like nonsense symbols at first began to align with specific train car numbers. Some of the codes corresponded to compartment passengers recalled being off-limits during the journey. Others pointed to cargo areas the FBI now believed may have been used for more than transporting goods. It raised a terrifying possibility that the girls may have discovered something they were never meant to see. Fingerprint analysis brought another shock. On the inside of the trunk's lid were partial prints, not belonging to any of the girls, but instead to a man already on record, a former railway employee with a criminal history of smuggling and violence. This man had vanished from public life shortly after 1987, disappearing almost as completely as the girls themselves. His sudden absence could no longer be ignored. Among the clothing fragments was something overlooked in the initial cataloging, a torn train ticket stub. Unlike the others, this one wasn't from the girl's journey, but from a different route entirely, a route linked to another case of missing women in 1986. The FBI began to wonder if the girl's disappearance wasn't an isolated tragedy, but part of a disturbing pattern stretching across multiple states. The burned diaries, once dismissed as too damaged, offered another haunting clue. Some words were still legible: basement, chains, and no light. Though context was missing, the implication was horrifying. Who had written these words? Was it one of the girls before her diary was partially destroyed? Or had someone else written them as a warning or even a taunt? Then came the discovery that rattled even the most hardened agents. Inside the trunk's lining, hidden in a slit of fabric, was a small photograph. It showed the four girls smiling at the start of their journey, but something was wrong. Behind them, blurred in the background, stood a man staring directly at the camera. His face was partially obscured, but his posture, his gaze, it was as if he knew the picture was being taken, and he wanted to be remembered. This photograph was shown to surviving passengers. Several said they recalled seeing the man on the train, though none could say exactly when or where he disappeared. Some thought he was a staff member. Others insisted he wasn't. The lack of certainty only deepened the dread. Whoever he was, he had been close enough to watch the girls, close enough to be captured in their final known image. All of these clues, audio whispers, coded notes, fingerprints, diaries, and photographs, painted a picture darker than anyone had imagined. They suggested the girls had not simply vanished, but had been ensnared in something deliberate, planned, and terrifyingly organized. For the FBI, every new clue was both progress and torment, because the closer they came to the truth, the more monstrous it seemed. The nation's reaction and ongoing mystery. When news of the chilling discoveries broke, the country seemed to stop in its tracks. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Newspapers ran bold headlines, and social media buzzed with theories. People who had been children in 1987, remembering the posters and broadcasts of the missing girls, suddenly found themselves pulled back into the haunting story that had defined a generation. The case was no longer history. It was alive again, breathing fear into the present. Families of the missing girls became central figures in a media storm. Their faces appeared on screens nationwide, their voices trembling as they relived the nightmare they had tried to bury. For them, the new evidence was both a blessing and a curse. It brought hope that answers might finally come, but it also tore open wounds that had never fully healed. Mothers clutched their daughters' belongings through tears, while fathers demanded accountability after decades of silence. Public opinion split sharply. Some believed the FBI was on the verge of uncovering the full truth, finally bringing closure to a case that had haunted America for a quarter of a century. Others were skeptical, suggesting that too much time had passed and that the new discoveries were nothing more than cruel coincidences. Talk shows debated endlessly, with experts arguing over whether the case could ever be solved. Documentaries and podcasts exploded overnight, each offering their own theories. Some pointed to organized crime syndicates, others to railway insiders, and a few to darker, more sinister forces that thrived in the shadows of Cold War America. Every episode seemed to end with more questions than answers, feeding the public's hunger for truth while deepening the mystery. Vigils were held across the country, candles flickering in memory of the girls whose faces had never left the posters. Strangers gathered in train stations to pray, to sing, to demand answers. Their voices echoed in the halls where once the girls' laughter had been heard, now replaced by whispers of loss. The case had become more than a crime story. It had become a wound shared by an entire nation. The FBI found itself under immense pressure. Every update, no matter how small, was dissected on primetime news. Questions were raised in Congress about how such evidence could have remained hidden for so long. Former agents were grilled about mistakes in the original investigation, and public trust in the system wavered. Some saw the reopening of the case as redemption. Others saw it as proof of decades of negligence. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories thrived. Online forums filled with armchair detectives who claimed to have solved the case from their laptops. Some argued that the government had known all along and buried the truth. Others swore the case was linked to secret experiments, covert operations, or hidden societies. The theories were wild, but they reflected one undeniable truth. The mystery had captured the imagination of an entire nation. The haunting audio clip from the cassette tape became a symbol of the case. Radio stations replayed the laughter of the girls, followed by the chilling sounds of footsteps and whispered commands. Listeners reported goosebumps, some even turning off their radios mid-play because they couldn't bear the eerie reality of hearing voices from the past, knowing those girls had never come home. Even the younger generation, who hadn't been born when the girls vanished, became enthralled. Schools discussed the case in classrooms. Young people watched documentaries late into the night, and many joined volunteer groups pushing for justice. The case, once fading into history, was now immortalized, a story that refused to be silenced no matter how much time passed. And yet, as the nation held its breath, one haunting truth remained. Despite all the evidence, despite all the new clues, the final fate of the four girls was still unknown. Their laughter lingered on tape, their belongings were preserved in a trunk, but their voices had vanished in